Hi everybody. So this is chapter 15, which is called Balance. And if we think back to the end of chapter 14, the trial had ended and Scott was found not guilty. Um, but Evan was not pleased with that, so he challenged Scott to a basketball competition. And it was kind of like a no rules competition. And both boys ended up getting hurt. And Scott lost and got mad and kicked the ball off far away and then ran home or ran somewhere. Okay, chapter 15 is called Balance. Balance, a device used for weighing that has a pivoted horizontal beam from which hang two scales. In statues and paintings, the figure of justice is often shown holding a balance. Grandma, can you talk for a minute? Jessie stuck a moshi pillow behind her head and cradled the phone to her ear. Sure, Jessie Bean, what's up? Jessie's grandmother lived 4 hours away, so Jessie called her on the phone a lot. Everything's awful, said Jessie, picking at a corner of her bedroom wallpaper that was peeling. She explained to her grandmother about the trial yesterday and the basketball game and Scott kicking the ball into the swamp. She told her how Evan had to hunt for the ball for half an hour before finally finding it, and how he told his friends to just go home. He'd find it himself. Just go home. So they did. And how Evan and Jessie were left to look for the ball, and how Evan didn't talk the whole time they did. And today he's not even eating or anything, said Jessie. Did you know that it's Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the one where the kids dress. Is that the one where the kids dress up? Asked Jessie's grandmother. No, said Jessie. Grandma was always mixing up things that sounded kind of the same but were different. During their last phone call, she was talking with Jessie about the sequoia trees in California, but she kept using the word sequester instead. Yom Kippur is the day when the Jewish people ask for forgiveness and they don't eat. Is Evan Jewish now? Asked Grandma. No, but he's not eating. He says he's not hungry, said Jessie. Sometimes that happens to me, Grandma said. I practically forget to eat. But Evan's always hungry, said Jessie. Mom says he's a bottomless pit. He'll eat when he's ready, said Grandma. Let it go. Jessie hated it when her grandmother said that. She was always telling Jessie to let it go and be the tree. Crazy yoga grandma. How could anyone be a tree? But I wanted to do something to help, said Jessie. Why don't you bake cookies, said Grandma. That'll get him to eat, right? I don't think so, said Jessie. Not this time. This was bigger than cookies. How could she explain to her grandmother how bad things were? Jessie had believed in the trial. She had thought the truth would come out in court, and with truth would come justice. But instead of truth in the courtroom, there had been lies, including hers. Instead of justice, there was a crime with no punishment. And now, she and Evan were going to have to stand up in front of the entire 4th grade and say that they had been wrong, even though Jessie knew that wasn't true. Grandma, it's so unfair, said Jessie. I know Scott Spencer took that money. I know he's lying, and now it feels like I did all this work just so he could end up looking innocent. Some things are beyond your control, Jessie, said her grandmother. You need to learn to accept that. You can't run the whole world. I wish I did, thought Jessie, but the world would be a better place if she was in charge. But then she thought of the terrible things she'd done. Grandma, she blurted out, I lied in court. She explained how it had happened. Her grandmother listened to the whole story without interrupting. Lying is wrong, said Grandma, but at least you did it from a good place in your heart. You don't need to feel ashamed about loving your brother. I still feel really bad about it, said Jessie. That's good, said Grandma. I'd be worried if you didn't feel bad about lying. You do have control over that. Nobody can make you lie. So feel bad for a while, and always remember what you've learned, and then move on, and be a better person. But don't beat yourself up, Jessie. You're only 7. Grandma, I'm 8, said Jessie. How could her grandmother forget her age? Really, said Grandma. Are you sure? I've been 8 for almost a whole year. My birthday is next month. Good, said Grandma, because I have a book I've been meaning to send you, and it will be the perfect birthday present. Grandma, said Jessie, her voice sounding warning, you're not going to send me The Prince and the Pauper again, are you? No, Miss Smarty Pants. I remember I sent you that book twice. You'll never let me forget that, will you? Why do you forget things? Asked Jessie. You didn't used to. Oh, Jessie Bean, I'm getting old. Her grandmother laughed quietly, and Jessie hugged the phone closer. And that's something neither of us has any control over, sorry to say. Jessie heard the doorbell ring downstairs. She knew her mother wouldn't hear it all the way up in the attic office, and she was pretty sure that Evan wouldn't answer it, even if he did hear it. Gotta go, Grandma, said Jessie. There's someone at the door. Okay, honey bear, feed the tree and bake cookies. I love you. Jessie ran downstairs and opened the front door. There was Megan. Hi, said Megan. Jessie lifted her hand in a short wave, but she didn't invite Megan in. I thought maybe you were mad at me, said Megan. Kind of, said Jessie. There was a short silence. Why'd you do it? Jessie hadn't wanted to believe that she was angry at her best friend, but now all the questions that she had tried to ignore since the trial came flooding back into her brain. Why'd you ruin all my hard work? Why'd you get Scott off the hook? Why'd you betray me and Evan? I'm sorry, Jessie, said Megan. I didn't want to make you mad, and I didn't want to mess up your trial, but the thing is, it wasn't really your trial. It was all of ours. Megan looked right at her. You did this great thing, Jessie. You gave us a real court, not some fake dress-up pretend thing, a real one. But in a real court of law, everyone has the right to a lawyer. So somebody had to stand up for Scott. Otherwise, the trial would have been a great big fake. Jessie didn't say anything, but she understood exactly what Megan was saying. Somewhere in the back of her brain, she'd known it all along. I wanted to win, she said finally, feeling all over again the pain of losing. But you're right. You did the right thing. The two girls stood there, both looking at their feet. Why was it so hard to talk about feelings? I'm not mad at you anymore, Jessie said, knowing that it was mostly true, and that by tomorrow it would be completely true. Megan smiled. See you Monday, Jess. She hopped down the front steps. Hey, Megan, called out Jessie. Do you think Scott took the money? Yep, I do, said Megan. She shrugged, and the look on her face seemed to say, that's life. Jessie watched her friend walk down the street. It was a gorgeous end of summer, just starting to be fall day. The trees swayed in the breeze. The sky was the color of cornflowers. The sun felt good on her skin. Jessie ran upstairs to her room and found the yoga book that her grandmother had given her the past Christmas. She flipped to page 48 and stared at the picture. Be the tree, Jessie murmured to herself. Slowly, she picked up her left foot and rested it on her right knee, finding and holding her balance for one blissful second. There's one more chapter, chapter 16. It's called Amends, and I'm going to read it right now too. All right, amends is a legal compensation of money or other valuable assets as a repair for loss, damage, or injury of any kind. Okay. In his whole life, Evan had never gone this long without eating. And the weirdest thing of all was that he wasn't even hungry anymore. Sometime around 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, his hunger had just disappeared, like turning off a light switch. He felt empty and light and a little dizzy in his head, but not hungry. He hadn't even planned it. Yesterday he'd come home and eaten his dinner as usual. And then the sun went down, and he thought about Adam and Paul, and he wondered if they had started fasting and if they would make it all the way till tomorrow night. And then he wanted to see if he could do it. Go 24 hours without food. Just wanted to see what it was like, and if he had the strength to do it. And that got him thinking about the Day of Atonement. The less he ate, the more he thought. Until here he was, sitting on his branch of the climbing tree, way up high with the leaves whispering to him and the birds pecking for their last snack of the day. Late afternoon shadows beginning to stretch across the yard. He began to think about his sins, and that was a hard thing to think about. Did he really have any sins? He didn't know. But there was one thing he did know. Right now, he felt lousy. And Evan knew that when he felt really bad, that usually meant he'd done something he regretted. Evan regretted the whole basketball game. He wished he hadn't played like that. He wished Megan hadn't seen him play like that, or Jessie, or anyone. He wished he hadn't been such a jerk. The game kept playing over and over in his head, every perfect shot looping through his brain, and it made him feel sick. He was never going to know what had happened to the missing money, but crushing Scott on the basketball court wasn't going to change that. Evan climbed down from the tree and went into the house. Jessie was in the kitchen with a mixing bowl and a bunch of ingredients spread out on the countertop: flour, sugar, butter, and eggs. What you making? He asked as he walked through. Your favorite, chocolate chip. Thanks, said Evan, grabbing his baseball hat from the front hall closet and heading for the door. "Where are you going?" asked Jessie. "Scott's." "No," said Jessie. "Don't do that. Quit worrying. Tell Mom where I went, okay?" Jessie followed him to the door. "And don't eat all the cookies before I get back," he shouted over his shoulder. He didn't really have a plan. In the back of his mind, he figured a handshake and at least one "I'm sorry" were somewhere in his future. Beyond that, he didn't know what would happen. Scott's house was a short bike ride away from Evan's, but his neighborhood was a world apart. The houses were huge and had fancy bushes planted in little groups, and two-car attached garages, and lawns that looked like they were edged with razor blades. As Evan walked up the brick path to the front door, he noticed that the two large maple trees in the yard were beginning to turn. They would drop a lot of leaves next month, but Evan knew that Scott never had to rake because his family had a service that took care of their yard. When the front door opened, Evan wasn't surprised to see Scott standing there. Evan could hardly ever remember Scott's parents answering the door. He looked better than he had yesterday, that was for sure. Cleaned up, no blood, and he was wearing jeans, which covered up his knees. But the look on his face was the same. A look of hatred, pure hatred, beamed right at Evan. "Hey," said Evan. "What?" said Scott. "What do you want?" Evan hadn't rehearsed what he was going to say, and now that he had Scott's angry face in front of him, it was hard to come up with anything on the spot. He stood there for a minute, his mind blank. What had he come here for? And then he said the only thing he could think of. "I wanted to see your new 2020. That changed everything. Scott stopped scowling, and his arms loosened up. He waited just a second before saying, "Okay." Then he stepped back to let Evan through. That's how it had been, ever since they were little. Scott Spencer liked showing off his new toys. Evan followed Scott down the flight of stairs to the finished basement, which was a combination playroom and family room. It was mostly the way Evan remembered it. Two couches, the computer desk, the file cabinet with the locked up snacks, bins of toys and building things, sports equipment, the swinging chair that hung from the ceiling, an electronic keyboard, and a treadmill. The thing that caught his eye, though, was the new TV. It was enormous, the biggest flat-screen plasma that Evan had ever seen in his whole life. "Wow," said Evan. Scott smiled. "Yeah, my dad bought that a few weeks ago. Cool, huh?" Evan noticed the sleek white box hooked up to the TV. "Is that the 2020?" he asked. "Wow, it's so small." "Yeah, but watch what it can do." Scott handed him two thick gloves that looked like hockey gloves, except that they were white, and a pair of heavy dark goggles that wrapped all the way around his head. Evan took off his baseball cap and put the gloves and goggles on. Then Scott pushed a button on the box. The next thing Evan knew, he was driving a car on a racetrack with other cars whipping past him at about 120 miles per hour. "Whoa," shouted Evan. "Turn to your right with your gloves. Pretend you're holding a steering wheel and turn to your right," screamed Scott. Evan just barely missed crashing into a haystack that protected the curves of the racetrack. He quickly grabbed hold of an imaginary steering wheel and got himself back on the road. "Squeeze your right hand to go faster and your left hand to slow down," said Scott, turning up the volume so that the roar of the race cars filled Evan's ears. Evan could practically smell the exhaust fumes. For the next 5 minutes, Evan took the ride of his life. He had never, ever played a game on a system that was so much fun. No wonder Scott couldn't stop talking about it. "Scott! Scott!" yelled a voice from behind. Evan turned and whipped off the goggles. Mr. Spencer was standing at the top of the stairs. Scott jumped to turn down the volume on the TV. "I've been calling you for the last 5 minutes. Will you turn that thing down? Do you have any idea how loud it is?" "Sorry, Dad," said Scott. "We're just playing road rage." "Well, you're going to blow out the speakers on the TV, and then you'll be the one to buy me a new one." Let me read that part again. "Well, you're going to blow out the speakers on the TV, and then you'll be the one to buy me a new one. And don't think I won't hold you to it. I didn't spend $5,000 on a new TV just so you could destroy it with your video games. That's an expensive piece of equipment, and you need to learn how to treat it with respect. Now keep it down. I'm trying to work." "Yes, sir," said Scott. Mr. Spencer turned and disappeared at the top of the stairs. Scott picked up a baseball and started throwing it back and forth in his hands. Evan wasn't sure what to do. He put the gloves and goggles down on the floor. The race cars were still zooming by on the TV screen. But without any sound, they seemed silly and fake. Your dad works a lot, huh? Said Evan. Even on a Saturday, said Scott, throwing the ball. My mom works a lot too, said Evan. But in his head, he thought, but at least she doesn't yell at us for making noise. Yeah, whatever, said Scott. You want to play Crisis? It's cool. And with that, he chucked the baseball into the corner of the room. Only, it was harder than a chuck, and his aim was off. Way off. The ball winged across the room and caught the corner of the TV screen. There was a loud crash, and then the TV went dead. Both boys froze. Evan couldn't make a sound. He felt like he had a sock stuffed in his throat. There was a foot-long crack in the TV screen and a bunch of smaller cracks that looked like a spider web. The house was completely silent, except for the noise of Mr. Spencer's footsteps running down the stairs. And then, there he was, standing in the doorway staring at the TV. Did you do that on purpose? He shouted at Scott. No, said Scott, I didn't. Because you're going to pay for that. Every penny of it. Your allowance, your birthday money. Forget Christmas presents this year. Do you understand? A vein popped out in Mr. Spencer's forehead, like something in an alien movie. Every time he said a word that started with P, pay, penny, presents, white flecks of spit flew out of his mouth. Evan thought he was going to explode or something. Dad, I did it! That television is brand new. Brand new, do you hear me? Evan took half a sideways step towards Scott. We're sorry. We didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. Mr. Spencer looked at Evan for the first time since coming downstairs. It was almost like he'd forgotten there was anyone else in the room. Slowly, he breathed in and out. His teeth were clenched. His jaw was as hard as a rock. Did you throw the ball? No, but we were, playing, and the ball just kind of hit the TV by mistake. We didn't do it on purpose. Evan was scared, but he couldn't help thinking what a jerk Mr. Spencer was. Sure, his mom got mad, plenty of times, and sometimes she yelled, but not when it was an honest accident. We're sorry, Dad, said Scott in a low voice. Well, that doesn't fix the TV, does it? Said Mr. Spencer. Without another word, he walked out. The room was quiet. Okay then, said Evan, just to fill the awkward silence. Scott looked down at the ground. Yeah, he said. He looked like his dog had just died. Evan picked up the baseball cap and jammed it on his head backwards. So this was fun, he said, deadpan, but Scott didn't smile or even lift his eyes off the floor. Evan could understand. It was lousy when your parent yelled like that in front of another kid. It made you feel like your whole family was just dirt. Scott probably wanted him to leave. Well, I'd better go home. Okay, said Scott, and thanks, for stepping in like that. Sure, no problem. 'Cause, my dad loves that TV. I mean, he really loves it. So, thanks. It's what friends do, said Evan, turning to leave. That caught him by surprise. He hadn't meant to say that. It was a little hard to think of Scott as a friend after everything that had happened. But where were they, he and Scott? Not friends, but not enemies. Somewhere between. Some place that didn't have a name or even any rules. Evan scratched the back of his neck. So, I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry about the basketball game yesterday and the trial and everything. Look, you say you didn't take the money, and that means you didn't take the money. And I'm sorry I made such a big deal out of it and that I was such a jerk. Scott nodded his head once. Yeah, well, forget about the morning meeting thing, you and Jesse apologizing, because, well, just forget about it. Okay. Evan felt better. He felt better than he had all week. It was like he'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks for days and days, but now he felt so light he could practically fly. And man, was he hungry. He could hear the chocolate chip cookies calling him from all the way down the street. Scott still looked pretty miserable, though, so Evan just said, "See ya," and turned to leave. He was at the top of the stairs when Scott called out, "Hang on." Evan turned and watched as Scott reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. Then he used it to unlock the file cabinet in the corner. Evan hoped he was going to offer him a yodel for the road. A yodel would be pretty tasty right about now. But it wasn't a yodel that Scott pulled out of the file cabinet. It was an envelope, and Evan recognized it right away. It was Jesse's envelope, the one that had $208 in it. Scott handed it to him. "I'm sorry I stole your money." Evan took the fat envelope. He'd forgotten what a thick wad the $208 was. All that work, all that sweat, mixing the lemonade and hauling it all over town, and standing in the hot summer sun and having to tell Jesse that he'd lost the money. That had been the worst part. "I guess you're pretty mad, huh?" said Scott. Evan was surprised to hear himself say no, and surprised to know that he meant it. Maybe it was the crummy trial, or the nasty basketball game, or the fact that he hadn't eaten anything in nearly 24 hours. Whatever it was, Evan felt emptied out. There just wasn't any anger left in him. "Why'd you take it, though?" he asked, looking at the money. Scott shrugged. "I don't know. 'Cause you had it, I guess." "Oh," said Evan. That didn't make sense to him. It's not like Scott needed the money. After all, his parents bought him everything he wanted. The newest iPod, the best hockey skates, the biggest TV. It just didn't make sense to Evan. But some things never do. "I gotta go," Evan said, stuffing the envelope into the front of his shorts. The sun was low in the sky, and his mother didn't let him ride his bike after dark. Soon, he'd go over to Adam's house for the big meal that marked the end of the Day of Atonement. "See you," he said to Scott. "See you later." They both walked out into the front yard, and Evan climbed on his bike. "Hey," shouted Evan as he pedaled down the driveway. "The next time a ball goes over the fence, it's got your name on it. You owe me for that." Evan didn't stick around to hear Scott's reply. It would come up again. The ball in the swamp. The next time they were messing around on the basketball court. And then the last part of the book is this letter called A Solemn Pact of Silence, which says, "Private, confidential, do not read. This contract is legal and binding for all parties who sign below. The undersigned do solemnly swear to never reveal to the members of Classroom 4O or to any adults who might ask questions what really happened to the $208 that went missing from Evan Trusky's shorts pocket on September 5th. This matter is considered closed, now and forever, and the details of it will be sealed for all time." And it's signed by Evan, Jesse, and Scott. Okay. If you guys want to tell me what you thought of the book, you can write a comment below on our Google Classroom. I hope you enjoyed that one, and see you guys later. Bye.